Michael will start us off with meditation, and afterwards us three will talk for a while, and then we'll do a session with all of you of Q&A, and finishing off with another meditation. So please, Michael.
So thank you very much for allowing me to speak in English, because I speak other languages, but I don't speak Hebrew yet, and it may take some time. So we'll continue with a short meditation. There are many different reasons to meditate. But maybe for tonight we can start with a very simple reason, which is this: to simply to connect or reconnect with ourselves. And we have a body, so one area that we can connect with or reconnect with is the reality of our body. And the body is an interesting thing because it can feel very tangible, very solid, can be very painful, but also it can feel extremely light. And sometimes in sitting meditation, the only sense of your body may be just a few very subtle sensations, and you won't have any other sensation of the body. So this is an invitation to bring our attention to the sensations of the body. And one way to do it, to prepare, is to, if that's okay with you, to close your eyes, so then there is less input, maybe less distraction. We'll have plenty of it from inside. And then to maybe get a posture that you feel it supports a certain quality of stability. So we're not too comfortable that induces sleep, but we're not too uncomfortable that it triggers pain or other activities of the mind. Another key thing that helps me is to take a deeper in-breaths, a little bit deeper into the body, so then my attention begins to flow inwards. And then as I maybe make the in-breath and out-breath a little bit deeper and longer, and as I bring my attention inwards, very gently, very slowly, things begin to slow down, slow down. And the reality of the body, the sensations of the body begin to be more apparent. So I may notice the posture itself. I may notice the sensation of the weight of the body on the chair or on the cushion or the mat. And as you start to settle, arrive, rest in the body, the activity of the mind can begin to also start to slow down, to settle. To perhaps drop it in the background, so it's not in the foreground. And we can give space inwards. So our attention becomes more spacious. With the foundation of the body, awareness of the body, we allow the attention to be spacious. And the body becomes also spacious. So there's space for the in-breath and out-breath. There is space for the physical sensations to emerge. There is space for the sense of the body, the posture. There is space for the breathing. There is space for the heartbeat. And there's a space also for the silence. If there is a certain activity of the mind, you can take a longer and deeper in-breath and out-breath. To increase the sensation of grounding. And allowing the area of the heart to become still. As the heart just listens to the silence, to the quietness, to the stillness. So we are aware of our internal landscape of feelings, sensations, activity of the mind. This is the internal landscape that we become aware. As we sit in stillness. It's possible that the body may need to make some adjustments. So just give your body the space it needs to adjust. Noticing any tension, maybe the jaw, lower back or shoulders. And just very gradually deepening the relaxation. Allowing the breathing to find its rhythm in a natural way. If you need more focus, then just notice the in-breath, out-breath. Or return to the more tangible sensations of your body. You may notice the activity of the mind. That probably is a residue of the activity of the day. It's fine, just give it space. No need to reject or change images, thoughts, situations. They come into consciousness and they can also stay a little bit. And they will also leave. And if there is a growing sense of ease, stillness, or relaxation, just bring your attention to that. So settle into that sense of ease or relaxation. And allow it to expand. So we are practicing this together as a group. So we can also relax our boundaries. Any psychological or physical boundary, maybe we can relax a little bit. We no longer need to contain or hold, control. You very gently just open. Very gently dropping the barriers, if you have any barriers. So it's my role to introduce Hagit, right? So she was a nun in Plum Village, so that's how I know her. Because we were together, monks and nuns. I feel she's a very, I don't know the age or other biological realities, but I feel she's a very courageous and determined person. And that has a very beautiful freshness, meaning that she doesn't get trapped in the past or worried about the future, and probably she's not worried about what she's going to talk about. So we'll find out. So I'll pass the microphone to her.
So thank you, brother, and thank you all of you for coming here. I'm happy to be with you and to be with my two dear brothers, Yuval and Michael. Very special opportunity. So Michael has been here for, I think, we're not sure, 3 weeks. So it's kind of been a long ride, very fruitful, very nice. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the topic of this evening, which is removing barriers and coming back home. So the title or the words we use, even in meditation, are really an invitation to touch an experience. So please take it as that. Whatever I say is an invitation to touch a certain experience, and if you find it relevant for your life, take it, and if it's not relevant for your life, your joy, your pain, it's okay. Just see how it touches you. So the practice of removing barriers, or another name for it, is letting go, which is a surprise. We usually think that to feel better we need more, right? So this is a kind of a radical suggestion to let go. But the question is removing barriers from between what and what? What are those barriers? What are they separating us from? And then coming back home, if we remove those barriers, what does that mean? What does home mean to you? And what does the practice of coming back home mean? So just starting with a question, you can sort of feel that. And I would like to suggest that those barriers, they seem as barriers, maybe when we get to understand them, they're no longer barriers. But these the things that stand between us and the present moment, which means between us and life as it happens in each moment, between us and reality, or being able to touch reality directly. So that is my suggestion of what is the practice of removing barriers. What does it help us to do to touch the present moment and reality? And also to remove what is standing between us and ourselves. So in a way, it's getting out of our own way. So this is something I heard a long time ago from a very wonderful practitioner, and she said that about Thich Nhat Han. Thich Nhat Han, our teacher, she said he doesn't get in his own way. And it was very true. It's like the wind, you know. So that's kind of the practice. And the definition or the suggestion of what does it mean to go back home in Buddhism is internal, it's not external. So that's already a bit of a shock. It's not outside, it's inside. And it has to do with the definition of what is, well, big word, happiness in Buddhism. It means feeling fulfilled. Sviut Ratzon. There's a Hebrew saying about that. Well, if you have few wills, you are easily feeling fulfilled. So fulfillment, non-seeking. So we all know what it feels like to seek all the time, to be restless, right? Touching the phone 10 times a minute, yeah. That's one way of always seeking. But it can also be this kind of an inner restlessness. So that's the opposite of that state of mind, which is non-seeking. We are comfortable and happy just where we are. It doesn't mean that we feel good. It just means that we are okay where we are. So that's sort of what coming back home means, or one of the things it may mean. And I'm just going to say a few words about it. We're not going to go into it. But it also has to do with researchers in brain science. That there are three sort of survival mechanisms that we have biologically and psychologically, which is one, very simply, it's very simplified. You know, it's more complicated than that for sure. But I can look at this place and the world and look at it as a place full of dangers. So I feel threatened. And then I respond accordingly. So that's one survival mechanism, right? I respond to threats. The second one is I am seeking, I'm driven, I need something. And I see the world is full of things I want. I want for myself. And we need both of those. We need to protect ourselves. We need to take care of our needs. And this third one, which is also a survival mechanism in our biological system, is the ability to rest and connect. So nothing threatens us. We feel safe, and we don't need anything. We ate, we slept. Now we can rest, we can relax, and we can bond. This is, you do children doing that. They play. When they don't have something else, they play. And this is also a survival mechanism. We need that, but we usually forget how immense the need is for rest in order for us to feel at home, in order for us not to stand in our own way. So that is kind of an overview, and that capacity to be able to relax and be in the moment is the ground for our ability for compassion. So compassion means that we are able to embrace distress. We are not panicked when we see distress, when we see pain. That's compassion. We want to relieve pain, and we know how to recognize it. So the ability to relax, to be in a non-seeking state, that is the ground for compassion, for a flexible way to relate to life, to feel at home. So in a way, the kind of key here, the remez, the clue, is that the way we respond to things is what brings us freedom more than the circumstances. So that's kind of the definition of happiness, okay, if you want. And the definition of suffering in Buddhism is the opposite: dissatisfaction, restlessness, not feeling at ease, seeking all the time needing something. That's the definition of suffering. So going back home in Buddhism is letting go of that restlessness and touching something that Buddhism calls the awakened nature. Sounds like a big word, right? So in order to help us not to get panicked when we hear that, awakened nature, but I'm not awakened, I'm not perfect, I do stupid things sometimes, right? Thich Nhat Han used the term part-time Buddha. Sometimes we are awakened and sometimes we're not. Sometimes we are really not feeling well, but we still can be awake to that situation. So that is kind of a capacity to feel at home, meaning we trust that if we let go of our worries and anxieties, there is something there that is called the awakened nature. There's not nothing there. So that's a kind of invitation to touch that in our lives and remove the barriers between us and that capacity to be fully present, fully clear in reality. And I think an important part of it, which really Michael was really very much inviting us to do, is it's very difficult to feel at home when we are not in our body. So we all know situations where when our body is here and we are somewhere else. And sometimes we have a good reason not to completely be in our body. It's a kind of a protection. So we need to be very gentle when we invite ourselves back to our body and respect the times that we cannot be in our body. But if our experience is not, any experience is not felt also in the body, it is not a full experience. So also that's why we keep going back to our breathing, so that we are in our body, not out of our body. So in a state of anxiety, I know for sure that I feel that my chest is like going up and I'm out of my body. That is how I feel anxiety. I recognize it. And we're soon going to do a little exercise that kind of helps to bring us back to the body. So maybe to put it in one word, like the experience in which we can experience that there is nothing standing between us and ourselves, us and the present moment. To put it in one word, it can be presence. And so now I want to ask you a question, and then we will do an exercise, and I will ask you again. So the question is, if I ask you how much do you feel present right now? Percentage, between 1 or 0 and 100. It's not. You don't have to answer. Just check for yourself. How much are you present now? Or maybe there's parts of you that are present and parts of you that are not. So that's okay. Just check. Yeah, and any answer is okay. No right answer. So now I will invite you to a very simple exercise. Some of you may know it, especially if you're in the therapeutic professions. It's used to work with anxiety, but it's also really very close to the practice, which is to use the senses to plant us in the present moment, to invite us back to the present moment, like with the bell. So the exercise is this, and I actually would ask you, if you want, to keep your eyes open, not to close them, and I will invite you to listen to sounds. And as you listen to them, see if you will notice, while we do the exercise, sounds that you haven't noticed before, and also notice the way you are noticing those sounds. So it's very simple. You just be invited to notice 5 different sounds. That's all. Okay? So we can just start now. And as you do that, also notice, where do the sounds come from? What do they tell you about the space you're in? It can be more than 5 sounds. Just listen to a sound and then see if you can hear another one. And where is it in space? How does it locate you in space? Okay, and now the same question. How present do you feel right now? From 0 to 100%. How present and how at ease do you feel right now? And the continuation of this exercise is to do it with the outer senses. So 4 things I see. And you always, when I do it, I find something I didn't see before. 3 things I feel, tactile, 2 things I smell, and 1 thing I taste. So even if I'm not eating, I taste something. So that's kind of using our senses to plant us in the present moment. And I will just want to read a text. I think I have a few more minutes. Yeah. It's very beautiful. It's from a sutra, a discourse, a sutra that is called Knowing the Better Way to Live Alone. And I'm going to say a bit about what is alone, and then we'll end. So how to be an island unto ourselves. So find a home within. So I'll read this in English. The Blessed One taught, I will teach you what is meant by knowing the better way to live alone. I will begin with an outline of the teaching, and then I will give a detailed explanation. Bhikkhus, that's monks, please listen carefully. So I'm just going to read the short explanation, not the detailed one. So the Buddha taught, do not pursue the past. Do not lose yourself in the future. The past no longer is. The future has not yet come. Looking deeply at life as it is, in the very here and now, the practitioner dwells in stability and freedom. We must be diligent today. To wait till tomorrow is too late. Death comes unexpectedly. How can we bargain with it? The sage calls a person who dwells in mindfulness night and day the one who knows the better way to live alone. So that's one way of removing barriers and going back home. Do not pursue the past. Do not lose yourself in the future. Of course, we think of the past and we think of the future, but the guideline here is to not lose ourselves. That's the barrier. If we're not present, we're usually either in the past or the future or in distractions in the moment. So that's sort of, it's pretty clear. It's not very complicated. So living alone doesn't mean to go to a cave somewhere. Don't need to do that. It just means that we have sovereignty over ourselves. That's what it means. We can be free in the moment, not be carried away by the past, not worry about the future, pulled by the future, and not be sort of like a leaf on stormy water with our emotions. We feel them, but we're not taken by them. We're there for them. And then we can respond to whatever comes in a better way. We cannot control it, never, but we can respond our relationship to reality changes if we're not carried away. So I think there's a lot to be said more about that, but I will end here and invite you to think what in the past may pull you, either a loss or something that kind of takes over you from the past, what in the future pulls you from the moment. And just to say that life only happens now, it doesn't happen before or after. So that's the reason why we want to practice being here. So thank you. And now I will invite Michael to continue, and maybe listen to one sound of the bell first. Yeah.
If you introduce the bell now, tell about the bell, how it's...
In Plum Village, we use the sound of the bell to stop. So every time a bell, we hear a sound of the bell, whether it's in the monastery or the church nearby, on the monks, where the monks live, everyone stops. Everyone freezes. So if you're talking, you stop talking. If you're cutting vegetables in the kitchen or you're doing something, you're interacting, you bring all your awareness back to yourself. So it's a practice, it's a training, like everything is a training to bring your attention back here and become conscious of what was going on right in this moment. And you maybe realize that when you're talking about something, maybe that something was not so important, or you notice that you were very invested in what you wanted to share, and whether that's necessary or not. So you become consciously aware of what's going on. So it's a practice, and sometimes, there is an app on the phone called Mindfulness Bell, which you can have it ring every 15 minutes, half an hour. And that's a reminder during the day, so not to get lost or to bring your awareness back to the present. So I have to deal with this timer. Yeah, there we are. So I'm going to talk about separation and when we talk about meditation, meditation probably is not about separation, it's about connection to oneself. And when I talk about mindfulness, mindfulness is to come closer to oneself, whatever that may be. It could be the feelings, the sensations, or my thinking process, and discover what is going on inside. So in a way, mindfulness doesn't interfere, it just recognizes. There's a kind of awakened quality to mindfulness that helps to recognize what is going on in us. So I feel this is maybe a personal perception that we live in a culture of separation, in a culture that builds barriers. And this barrier making or separation making already starts in our minds. And I'm going to read a very short section of what Thich Nhat Han has to say. Our minds create categories, space and time, above and below, inside and outside, myself and others, cause and effect, birth and death, one and many, and puts all the physical and psychological phenomena into categories like these before examining them and trying to find their true nature. It is like filling many different shapes and sizes of bottles with water in order to find out the shape and size of water. Interesting image. It's like filling many different shapes and size of bottles with water in order to find out the shape and size of water. So when I talk about barriers or separation, which is a barrier, I want to make two out of two people. I make a barrier between you and me. We know that already starts in our mind, and the way our mind perceives things, and also the tendency of the mind to solidify anything that happens, feeling or thoughts. It's a me. It has a solid, separate reality. But is that true? Another barrier we create is a relationship to nature, and that many of us we separate ourselves from nature. We fear nature. I lived in a monastery in California, and when I first arrived, I looked at the bush, and I imagined all sorts of terrible animals in the bush in Southern California. And yeah, there are scorpions, there are tarantulas, there are rattlesnakes, a big variety of rattlesnakes. So when I looked at the bush, I thought, I'm not going there. I had fear of going into the bush. But over time, I became to know nature and to connect with nature. So I dropped that barrier of fear was a barrier and get more acquainted with the rattlesnakes, with spiders, with coyotes, and other creatures that normally I was afraid of. So fear brings up a barrier, but actually I don't know what's behind the barrier. Yeah, I think I know, but actually I don't know. And obviously we have a reality here between the barrier between Palestinians and Israelis. We build a wall. We separate ourselves. We put a barrier. But do we know what's behind the barrier? Do we know ourselves? Maybe not. So nature, we separate ourselves from nature and we commodify nature. It's important because the destruction of nature, the destruction of the environment is very connected to that. It's not out of any, it's not ad hoc. It's not by chance. We are creating the destruction of nature, because when some people look at the forest, they only see wood. They only see lumber. they only see money. When I look at the forest, I don't see any of those things. Maybe because I'm in the wrong profession, but I'm not a carpenter. But even a carpenter has a deep appreciation of the wood, not just making money out of it. Yeah. So a carpenter may have a rich relationship with the trees, but somebody that just wants to cut the trees to make toilet paper may have a very superficial relationship to the trees. So we separate ourselves from nature, so we don't know nature in any depth. And I would say we don't know ourselves in any depth. Therefore we destroy nature. Now the interesting thing, there was an American guy, which is, he spent 27 years alone, living alone in the forest in Maine in the United States. So he decided to separate himself from humankind, or human unkind, I don't know what was his motivation. And he spent 27 years living alone in the forest. Now it came out in an article in the newspaper some time ago, and I thought, very interesting. So I'm just going to read a little bit of the section. It says, this man was called Knight. Knight said he couldn't accurately describe what he felt like to spend such an immense period of time alone. Silence does not translate into words. It's complicated. He said, solitude bestows an increase in something valuable. I can't dismiss that idea. Solitude increased my perception. But there is a tricky thing here. When I applied my increased perception to myself, I lost my identity. There was no audience, no one to perform for. There was no need to define myself. I became irrelevant. The dividing line between himself and the forest, Knight said, seemed to dissolve. His isolation felt more like a communion. My desires dropped away. I didn't long for anything. I didn't even have a name. To put it romantically, I was completely free. So that's someone that separates himself from being with others, and maybe through that solitude he connects not just with nature, not just with silence, but also with himself. And the interesting thing is he cannot define himself. It's very much like meditation. He didn't practice meditation, he just spent time in nature. So spending time in nature is, I think, a good investment. There's no dividends, perhaps. There are internal rewards. We also separate ourselves from beauty. That's a big thing for me when I see modern society, that we separate ourselves from beauty. Last year in Plum Village, the monks know how to enjoy themselves. They don't work very hard. They don't practice hardcore. They instead decide to, when the cherry trees are blossoming, to have a tea under the tree and falling petals of the cherry tree. And a friend of mine showed a photo of that, and it looked so. There was so much beauty in that very simple image of a couple monks sitting under a tree full of blossoms and drinking tea. Such a simple action, and perhaps we can feel the beauty of it, or perhaps not, because maybe we have so many barriers. And of course our modern lifestyle seems to increase those barriers. I know for myself, and sometimes we have little time for ourselves. We have very little time to stop at a park and just sit on the bench and not do nothing. But maybe if we did it, we would be feel more richer. Often I'm very puzzled by people. There's a beautiful full moon, and I walk in the street and I see this beautiful full moon. Nobody else is noticing the full moon. And I don't know if you ever sat in a quiet spot and watched the full moon and the effect of the light, the energy, the feeling, the sensation. It feels quite peaceful. So there's beauty in buildings, there's beauty in art, there is beauty in many things. And for me, beauty has a quality to nourish the soul. Something in our mind gets nourished. And it's something that's not very tangible, but we can feel it. And that maybe is very essential for our well-being, not to become aware of beauty, to become sensitive to beauty. Because beauty is saying a lot, has a lot to say, but it speaks to another part of our being, not necessarily the intellectual reality. And the same thing comes with states of mind. There are very beautiful states of mind. It's very beautiful to see someone that embodies kindness. It's very beautiful to see someone that is emanating compassion. It's very beautiful to see someone that has both stability, that has equanimity. It's very beautiful to see that in action. It's very beautiful to see someone that has humility. But in general, in society, we don't appreciate those qualities. They're kind of not appreciated. But they give us maybe a lot of meaning, a lot of depth of being, and I feel that is, we should not separate ourselves from them, because they may be the difference between being happy or not. And then we separate ourselves from suffering. There is, to some extent, it's very normal. If I feel pain, I react to pain. It has its purpose. But we cannot address suffering if we run away from it. And we are living in a world of suffering. I mean, to my awareness, there's no doubt. Even if I may feel okay. I don't feel so exposed, but there is something in myself that is attuned to the reality of suffering, or it is affecting me in one way or the other. And we can see that the way we consume. And I can see that when I was in England in the Brexit process, that was a big suffering, and it touched so many people in the UK at so many levels, and so many people react to what it brought up. And the same for COVID. Even for people that practice meditation, it brought up something. What did it touch in your mind? Why did it bring such a strong reaction? Where's the reaction coming from? So our practice of mindfulness is to bear witness to suffering, is to be present for suffering. So not to separate ourselves from suffering. Because first when we move away from suffering, we don't know what suffering is, so it's very difficult to address it. And we are hit by suffering whether we want it or not. Maybe indirectly or more directly, there's no way out of that. So I was lucky enough to go to do a retreat in Auschwitz with the Zen peacemakers. It's a Zen order in the United States. And we spent 10 days there. And it was very challenging. And I could see that only part of my being was in touch with the reality of Auschwitz. But a big part of my reality could not hold the suffering. It's very difficult, and it's impossible for one human being to hold that reality of suffering. But we were 90 people together meditating every day, getting to know, and that is bearing witness to suffering, because then we get to know all the multiple dimensions of that suffering. If we don't know them, the suffering will continue. On Buddhist terms, there was a king, King Ashoka, who became a very Buddhist king after killing hundreds of thousands of people, and he was in the battlefield. So the history goes, King Ashoka, and then he saw the immense suffering that he caused, and that changed something in him. And he became a Buddhist, and he promoted Buddhist values after that. So somehow in his actions there was something that opened up, and he saw the suffering. And we can see the suffering that's happening now in Ukraine. Is maybe much closer to us. And how we react to the suffering. But we could see the suffering also in Syria or in Iraq. So the question is, why do we continue? Why does history repeat itself? Maybe because we don't really allow ourselves to touch suffering. And I know that it's very difficult to touch suffering, and there are suffering. There are different degrees of suffering, yeah? But there was an interesting documentary in the BBC called Once Upon a Time in Iraq. And the documentary was about the reality of what Iraqis and US Army personnel faced in Iraq. And for me it was a meditation, because I was getting familiar with the reality of those human beings that went through such extreme events. So I used it as a meditation to feel, hear, and touch that reality of suffering using meditation, using mindfulness. So then that dimension becomes much broader. There's no black and white. There's no me or you. There is us. There's no barrier. Like Knight, this American guy in the forest, the barrier between him and the forest disappeared. This is very necessary, to adopt that barrier, because otherwise we continue to create suffering. Because we are creating a barrier between us and the suffering. So I will conclude here. Mindfulness practice is about that. And as I said, there's different degrees. Often we start with smaller degrees of suffering. Our own suffering, the suffering of my mother, the suffering of my father, the suffering of my partner. But also as a meditator, as a practitioner, we also need to broaden our capacity to be with the suffering, so we can bear witness to it, and then we can hopefully act in different ways. So thank you for listening. We'll listen to a sound of the bell, just to come back to our in-breath and out-breath.
Thank you very much.
So thank you, Michael. And now I have the honor of introducing Brother Yuval, which I'm not sure needs much introduction. So I'll just say that for me, it's like being with a big brother, like one of the pioneers of practicing meditation in Israel. So it's very nice for me. And also kind of, that's my interpretation, of course, but a nice kind of an embodiment of the three aspects of a practitioner, which is the meditator. There's no need much to say about that. And the artist. So a lot of poetry, beautiful poetry. And the warrior, meaning being fearless in the face of whatever comes up. So thank you for being there.
Michael, you spoke about carpenters. I don't know if we ever discussed it, but I study carpentry with my Japanese teacher. I have a teacher lives on the outskirts of Kyoto. His name is Takami Kawai. He's the grandson of Kawai Kanjiro. Kawai Kanjiro was one of Japan's greatest ceramic artists. And his inspiration for becoming a carpenter came to him because of the beauty of his grandfather's home. He used to play with all the beautiful pottery and among all the beautiful wood pieces that made up the home of his grandfather. And you talked about reconnecting with beauty. So that's something that's I'm very lucky to study from Takami, and he taught me a saying in Japanese carpentry that also connected with something else you said about broadening our view and our perspectives about things and looking at the bigger picture. So in Japanese carpentry, we say that you don't choose the piece of wood, you choose the side of the mountain from which the piece of wood came from. And this has a very down-to-earth meaning and a very philosophical meaning. The down-to-earth meaning is that when you construct a Japanese house, you very carefully observe the way the tree grew in its original surroundings, and then when you transport the cut tree to the place where it becomes a house, then you reposition it in the same way it used to stand on the side of the mountain. Which means, if this side of the tree faced west is there? There's the west, right? So if it faced west on the mountain where it grew, then it needs to face west wherever it goes. It became adapted to growing that way, and you respect the way that it grew, and you want it to continue to live on as a piece of a house facing the same direction it did originally. And that's the down-to-earth part, yeah? The more philosophical part is that you don't choose the something, you choose, well, where it came from. You choose something not based on your instrumental relationship with it, but based on your intimate connection with it. And when there's an intimate connection with it, it's no longer in it, and it's no longer in itself or by itself. It has context, it has a whole texture that comes along with it, and which you take into account. And so the side that it was facing is just as an example of one more part of its being beyond the beauty of the wood or whatever else makes us choose a piece of wood instrumentally. So I think in many ways, for me, Buddhism and Buddhist practice is moving away from a purely or mainly instrumental regard to life, to people, to things, to moments, using things, asking things to be useful for me, for my past, for my future, for my now, for my whatever made-up needs. In favor of not deserting using things, but first coming into an intimate connection with things, and only then seeing what use can be brought by these things, which doesn't damage their relationship with, if you said nature, then nature is one aspect of it, another aspect would be community, another aspect would be friendship, would be religious life, and whatever greater context we're talking about. And once you have that, then use is something that stops being technical. If, for example, we are friends, and our friendship is intimate, and it's close, and we deeply care about each other, then when we talk with each other about our problems, we're not using each other. You can use someone to talk about your problems. I need an ear now. I need a shoulder to cry on, yeah? And you can be very abusive while using someone like that. But not if you have an intimate connection there, which supersedes or precedes the use that you find or the usefulness that you find in the connection. So I think for me, in many ways, it's the way of making peace between these two aspects of living, which is useful and intimate, and finding the ways to bring those together. And I find that they come together well as long as intimacy is on top and usefulness comes second. And it just doesn't survive. Intimacy just doesn't survive usefulness being first. And I think in most things that I look at that are tragic in the way that we live our lives in this, in our society in modern times, I think I can interpret most problems in us reversing the what do you call it, the sidra adifuyot, the priorities, positioning the usefulness of things as first degree, and then in the second degree, and let's see if we can also find the time and the place for intimacy there, and if we can, then it's a privilege. And I find that Buddhist life is turning that picture around and saying, if we can find usefulness there after intimacy takes place, then that's fine. Okay? And so that's one perspective that came to mind while you both were talking, and I thought was worth focusing on for a moment. Which also brings me to the subject of meditation, which for me has been now more or less a 30-year journey, and discounting the time when I was a kid. And when I was a kid, I had a 6-month episode of meditation because a good friend of mine in Kita Aleph, in the first grade, when I was 6 or 7, we walked to school together, and his father was a scientist, and he told me, the kid, he said, my dad told me that if you focus on a point in the wall for 15 minutes, then you pass out, you faint. And I, of course, became very curious about it and started training and started focusing on a spot on the wall for 15 minutes trying to pass myself out, which, of course, didn't happen. I don't know where he came up with it, but it didn't happen. What did happen was me sitting hours in front of walls watching a point. And I had crazy hallucinations, and I saw images moving in the wall, and I experienced mental conditions that were very, very interesting for a 6-7-year-old kid. But that passed, and And something like 10 years later, I rejoined meditation, or about 12 years later, rejoined meditation from a Buddhist perspective now. And as I told you before, I started with Tibetan Buddhism, which was very otherworldly to me. It involved a lot of meditation that was really out there. I don't know, I think it bore the most similarity to things that I experienced under the effect of hallucinogens, like LSD or plants of whimsical nature. And it was deeply interesting, and it could satisfy my curiosity for months on end. But I didn't feel that it was, if you talked about coming home, it didn't feel like coming home. It felt more like discovering faraway lands, in a sense. And it bore an amazing thrill with it, but it didn't feel like home. And after a few years of both Tibetan meditation and some nice drugs, I stopped both when I became acquainted with Zazen. Zazen is a whole group of meditations practiced in the tradition of Zen and Japanese Zen, and which most of them involve very basic mindfulness. Sitting just mindful to whatever happens. Sometimes it involves technique, being mindful of breath, being mindful of sounds, being mindful of senses. Like you described before, I think these are common in most Buddhist traditions, the meditations that you pointed out before. But then I became acquainted with another type of meditation that I never knew before. And it blew my mind. It blew my mind to the ground. It blew my mind. It didn't take me to faraway lands. It took me to the utmost simplicity I ever met. And that was shikantaza. Shikantaza literally means in Japanese just sitting or only sitting. And the practice of shikantaza is really beautiful in its simplicity. It's basically you sit and do nothing, but really nothing. Not lazying about in the traditional sense. You don't just no, none of that. Yeah. You just sit and really, really do nothing. You don't employ your mind in any way, not even in the sense of trying to be mindful. Now, the theory behind it, which I find is very non-theoretical, it's very practical, is that when you do not employ your mind knows really well what to do. When you leave it to its own devices, your mind doesn't do bad stuff, it does good stuff. Left to its own devices, your mind is Buddha mind. And when you said that people say about Thai that he doesn't get it his own way, there was a beautiful expression. I never heard it put that way before, but it really hits the nail on the head, because I think that's how we screw things up, is with all that self we put in there, which gets in the way of something very natural that occurs in the human mind. The human mind knows what to do. Human mind knows, if we talked about rest and the importance of resting, your mind tells you when it's time to rest. You can defy it. You can say, no, I'm not going to listen to you, and no, I want to watch another movie, I want to read another book, I want to do another meditation and become a better Buddhist, therefore I will not rest. And you can do that. But that would be not listening to your Buddha nature. But your Buddha nature talks. It says what it needs. And for me, shikantaza is, I think, one of the most surprising discoveries in Buddhist practice, because of its simplicity, its utter simplicity, the understanding that we're all perfect Buddhas to begin with is something I think most Mahayana Buddhists share, that position. But this practice, I think, embodies this in a very direct way. It involves or requires a very deep trust in you have no idea what's going to happen. And you just entrust yourself in that unknown. In that unknown, I mean not in a very, grandiose sense. Unknown in the sense that you're going to sit there for the next few minutes and not knowing how your mind is going to organize itself. And you're going to watch it fall apart and recompose itself and fall apart and recompose itself probably several times. And you don't know what's going to come out of it, and you're not aiming at anything. Whereas in many other Buddhist practices of concentration and mindfulness and imagining and constructing mental constructions of intellectual type, of a visual type, you very often have an aim there. Something you want to reach. Degrees you need to climb, and this meditation is very subversive in these senses. It doesn't allow you to do all that. You have to really give up and give in to something that you have no idea what's going to do with you. You're allowing Buddha nature to take you for a walk, and you don't know where. So these last few years I've spent introducing shikantaza to people because I think it's a very welcome addition to the array of meditations that we practice regularly in Buddhism. I was sitting with this very intelligent woman today that has a podcast. It's called the Shine, and she wanted to talk about right livelihood, and we spoke about right livelihood for about an hour, and there too in that conversation, as in any subject that we'll dive into long enough, deep enough, most things speak for themselves. Basically, for right livelihood, you need to not screw it up. Your mind wants right livelihood. Your body seeks right livelihood. In itself, it's easy. It's not something that we need to strive to relentlessly in order to get there. It's something to ease into, and with deep trust, I think, and it lets itself be known more than something that we try to achieve. And so I was very glad for the way you introduced Hagit, the way you introduced suffering as basically not being okay with what's going on, not accepting what's going on, and then you came by and said that when what's going on is suffering, then that's the toughest, but as important as anything else. And I think that's another thing I think we should bear in mind, and I think that's a good thing to finish with, is that I think as Buddhists, the main obstacle is Buddhism itself. And I think as Buddhists, we fall very often into the trap of trying to use Buddhism to eliminate suffering. Buddhism is not there to eliminate suffering. It's there for the intimacy of suffering, for reconnecting with suffering as well, not getting rid of it. It's a part of our existence to be not to be reckoned with, something to be to reconnect with, something to respect as part of our being. It doesn't mean that we should make ourselves suffer more. There's really enough suffering out there and in there. But when we try to get rid of it, we just make up more and become even more dissatisfied. So, hope I didn't cause too much of that now. So, thank you. Q&A for a while? Yeah? Yeah, so now we're all yours.
So if you have a question that relates to your life or something you want to share, then please do. And difficult questions, easy questions.
Questions about your lives, questions about friends' lives. Yes.
Mental boundaries, like myself and the others, the now, the future, the past, and everything that separates us from life. I know it's the main reason for suffering, also for my suffering. Yet sometimes it feels so small and so ignorant, so I don't know how to live.
First stage, redirect the question to someone else. That already gets rid of like 99% of the suffering.
There are no boundaries, like everyone is like, anyone can.
Anyone can't answer that. That's fine.
So I'll just start. I don't know if you're talking about boundaries or maybe mental habits. So states of habitual states of minds that are maybe not, that cause suffering, that are not so pleasant, that separate myself from myself, that I don't feel. Well, so some, let's say, mental habits don't really have anything. They're just habitual tendencies. They really don't have any, let's say, deeper roots. But there are some that maybe have a history. So there is a kind of a suffering that I need to address, in a sense. So when you sit in meditation, you get to know what your mind is doing, and then you get to know, or familiar with different thought processes, and once you get familiar, you know that's just that kind of a habitual tendency that has no more substance to it than just that is habitual. But maybe there are other states of mind or feelings or thoughts that have more roots in something a bit more complex, let's say complex. And therefore we may need to come closer to them, whatever means we may use, including for myself, psychotherapy, as a way to explore them in more depth. Because sometimes in meditation, even with meditation, I may not have direct access to that. Because there are defense mechanisms, there are all sorts of... So I may need, in my case, I speak about me, sometimes I feel that, mindfulness, I can see very clearly a state of mind coming, and because there's enough mindfulness, I can see it as a process, and I can see that it may take time to be with it, but as I'm practicing a lifestyle that generates mindfulness, I can be with it more concretely. Like, for instance, with anger, in a monastery there was one person that triggered a lot of anger, but because I live with him, I can be more familiar with this anger and maybe understand its roots. So that would be a continuous process of being with some particular feeling or emotional mental state that I decide I'm going to be with it in a skillful way, and there may be skillful ways by generating mindfulness. But maybe I don't have enough quality of mindfulness, and I need someone to help me to explore that he or she may provide that quality. And it could be someone that you can trust, that you can talk about it, and in that sense explore all the multi-dimensions of that in order to get more familiar with it. So it doesn't become just a repetitive habit. You are beginning to discover different aspects of it, and you are communicating with it, and you're discovering what it is, maybe with more depth. And from that point, I'll leave the microphone to Hagit, or to maybe shed more light on that.
Yeah, so I'll just continue from there. That what came to my mind is that I remember this line that kind of hit me. A line of Thich Nhat Han that he said, if you're suffering, or what you described, mental habits or mental knots feel like they're too big for you to handle, it means that you're not only yours. So that kind of helped me say, okay, it's good to see the roots of things in order to sort of work with them. And for that, what came to my mind can be helpful, besides what Michael said, is that in Plum Village, one of the main sort of, characteristics of the practice is nourishing joy, because we have enough suffering already, and we need to feel nourished in order to be able to have a big enough container to face things inside of us that may be not so easy. So what do I nourish myself with? Do I even stop and think if I'm nourishing myself, or I'm just like, how do you say, mevatzat mesimot, like just have a to-do list and treat myself as a kind of what's the word for mesima? A project machine. So do I stop and see how do I nourish myself? And when I nourish myself, I know that naturally I have more of a capacity to be with those things that are more difficult, and I see them differently. But it's really can be a process of years, so no hurry. Yeah, so that's what came to mind. Yeah, thank you.
If I had to continue both my colleagues, I think one of the things that hit me really remarkably from the Buddhist point of view that I never met before here was the fact that Buddhism treats the self as something malleable, like chomer bar lisha. Whereas we live in a society where the self is something we believe in it very deeply, that it's got substance. I'm not just talking about habits. This is me. And I think no, we're mainly just talking about habits, even if they have complicated environments where they grew, or complicated surroundings where they stemmed from, and rooted in trauma and rooted in very serious stuff. Still, it's all very malleable. So meditation is one way to reshape the self. But that's only one way. If we approach meditation in a broader sense, in the sense of meditation in everyday activity, then you find thousands more practices of changing things in you and between you and the world, that you find they're conducting themselves in a way that is harmful or not beneficial. And wanting to change that a lot of the times means practice. I think, when I started studying Zen Buddhism, when you study Zen Buddhism, a lot of the ways that you study in are in the arts. And my main art to begin with was calligraphy. I studied Chinese and Japanese calligraphy. And most of the things that I got stuck on, where I arrived at an impasse and couldn't proceed and couldn't figure out how the hell does she do that. I'd look at my teacher, see her hand flow like water, or soar like a bird, and it was amazing, the freedom that was in her movements. And I'd ask her, how the hell do you do that? You know what she'd answer me like 99% of the times? Practice, practice, practice. and I think that was useful not only for calligraphy, it was for so many other things in life. Today on that podcast, a very similar question to the one you asked was raised by the one holding the podcast. So listen, I'm trying to change myself as a person. Okay? So okay, what are you trying to change? And she says, I'm very impatient. And I'd like to learn patience. And I know you Buddhists love patience, and you train in patience. How should I train in patience? So I could very easily tell her that I'm one of the most impatient people that I know. I come from a very impatient background. I really have no idea how people who knew me 30 and 20 and 15 years ago could bear me for 2 minutes. As how impulsive I was in my reactions to things. I was the השולף הכי מהיר במערב. I was the quickest draw in the West, and it was really unbearable, the lack of patience there, and I still have a lot of training to do, and I intend to practice patience till my dying day. Not because I'll become perfect at it. I don't think I will. But I can see, without a doubt, how when you practice patience, you become more patient. And it has its ups and downs, and it's not like this straight line. I think all progress goes like this. Yeah, it has its ups and downs, and it has its drawbacks, and then it jumps ahead, and it's not a linear thing, and not a very orderly thing. But still, all in all, when you practice the things that you'd like to change in, eventually they bear significant fruit. So the more I practice, the more my belief in practice as a method becomes deeper. So I don't know if is any of the things that we said seem to be of value to you? Yeah? Thank you.
mentioned a lot the word intimacy, which is kind of like an abstract concept. Can you say a little bit more about what you mean when you say intimacy?
I can start with what Michael said about the moon. I think it was a wonderful moment for me here. It felt... Oh, sorry. I'll start with what Michael said about the moon before. I don't know if any of the other people in the room felt it, but it seemed that for a moment everyone here was with Michael and the moon. Is this striking a chord with any of you here? That it wasn't just me that fell in Michael's charms that moment, but that something happened in that moment that brought us all together for a moment? And what came to mind the moment after that moment of intimacy or closeness or togetherness that occurred very spontaneously, you could see that Michael was having a very authentic experience at that moment, and we all were drawn in. But the moment after, I recalled a piece by Yoshida Kenko, a 14th century Japanese monk, that had this wonderful notebook that he wrote in. And one of the things he wrote there once was very funny and very tragic at the same time. The thing that he wrote there was, I heard a man today say, there's nothing more beautiful and magical than the moon. And another man who sat there said, dew is even better. And then Yoshida Kenko notes, says it was amazing. They were fighting about it. Okay, so I think when we bring all of that together, we can screw everything up and de-intimize everything very easily. You can have this wonderful moment, looking at the moon, not needing anything, not asking the moon for anything, and that moment is whole, and there's beauty there, and there's peace there, and in a very deep sense, everything is okay. In Buddha's life story, one of the most significant moments in Buddha's life story is a moment where his dad goes to talk with workers, and he leaves him under a tree, the Buddha kid, before he's Buddha. When he's Siddhartha and he's under the tree there and he's sitting, and there's nothing really special going on. He's just sitting waiting for his dad to finish stuff with the workers in the field or in a building or somewhere. But he notices that everything is fine. In a very deep sense, everything is fine. And if you know a bit of the Buddha's life story, then there's another critical moment right before he sits for his very famous meditation where he finds out the Four Noble Truths and all that. This very dramatical moment of meditation. Before that, there's the scene with the Brahmin's daughter that helps him, gives him food, rice pudding. Yeah? And no, before Mara. The rice pudding and all that, he becomes a bit stronger, sits in meditation. Even before that, there's this moment where he recalls the moment of his childhood, sitting under the tree where his father left him, and everything was okay. This is after 6 years of basically trying to destroy his self in violent means by being an ascetic. After 6 years of the ascetic ways, he revisits the basic questions of life and says, is this the way? And he says, no, this is not the way. Have I gained any significant or mind-boggling achievements due to all these practices? He says, no, I haven't. Very truthfully answers himself, no, nothing special happened there. And then he recalls that moment where everything was just fine. In a very simple way, and he asks himself, could that be the key? And he says, yeah, that's the key. In that very, very simple moment where he sat there and it was okay, just sitting under a tree, and that was just fine. So I think intimacy is the basic state of being before we try to utilize reality for means, before we try to harness reality for achievements, before we try to analyze reality in order to get something out of it. And in that way, if I discussed a few moments ago right livelihood, then right livelihood doesn't necessarily mean a good paycheck. It means a good connection with what you're doing. It means that you feel value in what you're doing. And paycheck could be crap. It doesn't really define what would be the best thing for you to do. The best thing for you to do is something where you find love and compassion while doing it, where you find beauty while doing it, where you find connection while doing it, where you can be there while you're there. And that means something. Way more than anything you can quantify. Once you begin to quantify it, you should really ask yourself, is quantifying taking the first degree or the foremost point of view? Or does it accompany something that is deeper? And I think, so in many senses, intimacy is not defined by what it is, it's defined by what it's not. It's not trying to gain something out of something, it's being with the something. Not for the sake of something else. In Hebrew, we say לשמו. להיות עם הדבר, לשמו. לא לשם משהו אחר. Being with something for itself, not for something else that is a derivative of it. Does that answer a bit? Yeah? Okay. Thank you.
First, I don't understand the relation between Buddhism and collective action. And to be more precise, I'm wondering now about the gap between the objective reality around the climate crisis and us destroying the planet. So the objective reality is quite bad, and I don't feel that I can say that everything is fine. And I'm wondering, first, how all of us, or most of us, including myself, don't seem to realize or to connect with the fact that maybe something horrible is going to happen very soon. This is one thing. And the other thing is, again, going back to the collective action and how Buddhism relates to it, because I'm practicing, and mostly what I'm hearing is going home to yourself and maybe like a mountain, maybe let everything be and go by. And I don't know how can you be an activist with it, or should you be an activist, or did I make myself clear?
I think, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Michael,
easy questions.
Well, I think this has many dimensions. I mean, also I may be able to do something about climate. I may not be able to do something. So maybe one thing, and I'm not attempting to give an answer to the question, is to reduce that inner temperature. So we're talking about climate change and the global warming. But maybe one way is to improve the situation is to reduce the inner temperature. Greed, anger, confusion, all the reality of suffering that exists inside of myself to start to take care of that. Because the result of that is more consumerism, is more ignorance, is not knowing what my actions are doing, how I'm using the water, how I shop, how I invest my money, where I invest my money. So this becomes, by being aware of my tendencies, then has an effect on on my actions. So for instance, I try not to fly. I had to fly here because when I thought about going by land, I would have to come for Turkey, Syria. I thought, well, maybe that's not a great idea, or the other way around. But and I not having myself too much on the shoulder, whatever. But I don't fly when I'm in Europe, and even from where I live in Ibiza, the island, I take a boat which is 10 hours. Most people would never think about doing something like that. So that's one example that my practice, let's say, on awareness that naturally comes from the practice is an action that I can do. Now, this is just one person. But I think the other thing is that there is something in us that if it changes, it has an effect. Now, I don't know what effect it may have. But I know that it has an effect on me. So by having less greed or less anger, I know it has an effect on me. And I feel it may have an effect on consciousness, human consciousness. So that's something to, let's say for me, is an investment. Let's call it that way. I do my best to reduce my ignorance, my anger, my greed, my whatever. And I become lighter. My temperature, I become cooler inside. And I think that has an effect. So if there's enough of us that are becoming cooler, there may be a chance. But climate change is just one of the issues. There's unfortunately many other Pandora boxes are quite ready to be opened. So I don't have the answer to why as humans we've kind of come to this place in history. But the question is a little bit, I think there is something that we can do internally, and that has an effect. I wouldn't know what effect, but I think it will have a positive effect.
Did you want to say something?
After you.
Okay, so I was just looking at the clock and wanting to leave time for meditation, so I'll be short. So it came to mind. My mind is. Wait, I forgot one thing. There is in Buddhism. There's a clear sort of thought about individual consciousness and collective consciousness, and they are affecting each other. Collective consciousness is affecting us, but we are part of the collective consciousness. So never disregard one person's consciousness ability to ripple around. So don't doubt that, even if it's small. And we've seen things like that in the past, that the habits around smoking everywhere really changed because some people were very determined about that. So that's one thing. The other thing is, for me, I find it that many times I go in between despair and wanting to control, and neither work. So I have to look for something else which is maybe love or care, but it's not an answer. It's just kind of a feeling. And the third thing is a recommendation to listen to a podcast. Plum Village podcast is on YouTube, and it's called "The Way Out Is In." And one of the chapters is with Joanna Macy, and she says whatever I said now, much better. So listen to that. So thank you.
You enjoying the recommendation to listen to Joanna Macy? Yeah. Perhaps to add a small reading list to expand on the things that were said now. But to begin with a small statement the Dalai Lama once said: if you feel that you're very small and you can affect very little change in the world because you're so small, just think about how a mosquito changes a room once he's in it. Okay? So that's a little wisdom from the Dalai Lama about us small ones and how much we can affect. So that's one way to look at it. Another way, I think I would recommend to read, apart from the writings of the Buddha, the Mahayana Buddha, about emptiness, about interbeing, which I think help us to understand how small and big are mostly fictional assessments that we make, and the real effect of things is immeasurable. But if you would like to translate that into very common sense and methods of action, I would recommend going on to learn modern students and teachers of nonviolent struggles. I would begin with Henry David Thoreau, with his articles about slavery and about civil disobedience, how to not partake in harmful ways that the government ensues. I would continue to people such as Martin Luther King and Gandhi, who were both students of Henry David Thoreau. And I'd continue to Gene Sharp, which I think is perhaps the most elaborate thinker of them all in terms of nonviolent struggles. A lot of the wisdom of nonviolent struggles is about how you can use very little force to make very broad change and very significant change. So that's just to begin with. Thank you. Shall we meditate for a while? Okay. So let's do some shikantaza. Okay, let's just sit for a while. I'll accompany with a bit of instructions. So let's start with positioning the body so that the back is straight. Neither too tight nor too loose. The head and neck are a natural extension of the back, and they align with it. The chin is tilted slightly inwards. Everything else just falls. We're not trying to get anywhere or achieve anything. We're not sitting here to become mindful or compassionate. We are not trying to be Buddhas. We're just sitting. Not trying to get anything out of this, just sitting. We are not seeking any psychological gain, or mood gain, or spiritual gain. We do not intend to become better people due to sitting. We're just sitting. Nothing to achieve, nowhere to go. just sitting quietly for a moment, asking nothing from this evening, from anyone else this evening, from ourselves, from God, from future moments. Can I just sit here for one moment, asking nothing to be otherwise than how it is this very moment? Holding on to nothing. Chasing nothing away. Just very plainly sitting. And while sitting, there's the noise of sirens blaring close by. There may be body pains because we have bodies. Waves may be in the mind because we have minds. Itches might come to the skin because we have skins. And for this very brief moment, we're willing to accept this mind, this body, this evening, for everything that it is, not asking it to be anything else. Not asking for extras. Not asking for anything to drop away and leave. Just for one moment, can we sit with all this exactly as it is, asking nothing? Let us very gently open our eyes and look for a moment at all the wonderful people here in this room, all these sinner saints sitting here, a mixture of everything that's so terrible about being human and so wonderful, and that's all of us. And I'd like to dedicate to my two friends here this piece of an interview with Thich Nhat Han that I read to you before. I'd like to read it to you guys and to sign off with that. So these are Ty's words, not mine. And he says this. He says, when we give ourselves a chance to let go of our tensions, the body's natural capacity to heal itself can begin to work. Animals in the forest know this. When they get wounded, ill, or overtired, they know what to do. They find a quiet place and lie down to rest. They don't go chasing after food or other animals. They just rest. After some days of resting quietly, they are healed and they resume their activities. We humans have lost the wisdom of genuinely resting and relaxing. We worry too much. We don't allow our bodies to heal, and we don't allow our minds and hearts to heal. Meditation can help us embrace our worries, our fears, our anger, and that is very healing. We let our natural capacity of healing do the work. So thank you, everyone. Thank you.